To just say, everyone, thank you so much for joining us on webinar number 2 of the sustainability series in November, December. Stan has very kindly offered to chair. We're very grateful to Rupert, Maria, and Paul for attending as panelists. This is all about power and locations. So talking about what we can do in our locations and using certain types of power and electricity and where we're using it from to reduce emissions on our productions. So I'm going to hand over to Stan. Q&A box is there for anyone with questions for this session, and we can deal with those at the end. Anyway, Stan, thank you so much.
Thank you, Anthony, and welcome everybody. The second webinar in the series of 4 looking at sustainability in film and TV production. So last week we looked at the whole area of communications and getting people on board and getting buy-in from all the different departments. And this week we're going to talk about the biggest causes of emissions on a film production, which is basically burning diesel. And we're going to look at it from the perspective of the 3 departments that play the biggest role in using diesel. So I just wanted to start by talking about energy in general and diesel and fuel. The compression ignition engine was invented by Rudolf Diesel, and when he developed the engine, he intended it to run on vegetable oil. So I have here a litre of vegetable oil, and the key thing really that I wanted to bring to your attention to in relation to this is the amount of energy that's contained in 1 litre of vegetable oil, in 1 litre of diesel, in 1 litre of petrol. It's about the equivalent of 10 man-hours of work. So if you consider the cost of getting 10 people to do physical labor for an hour, that's what you're getting with a litre of diesel. So I read years ago an article, and it stopped me in my tracks, where it said, without diesel, you don't have an economy, because so much of what we do and how we live our lives revolves around diesel and petrol, and everything from growing our food to transporting our food to moving people around, moving goods around, and powering, in our case, when we're on location, powering the electricity. And it is just such a huge factor in how we live our lives, and we really tend to take it for granted. But the downside of burning diesel is the emissions. It's when you're burning diesel, you're putting CO2 into the atmosphere. Humans have already increased the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere by 50%, and we need to roll back on that. We need to start drawing down the CO2 that's in the atmosphere. So we're looking at the film industry in particular, but the government, the EU and the UN have targets in relation to reducing emissions on the big picture scale, but we're looking at how we do it just on location, on film productions rather. So today we have 3 panelists, and we're going to look at the 3 main areas that we use power. So Rupert McCarthy-Morrogh is an award-winning filmmaker, cinematographer, and lighting designer. Rupert is very green-minded and has been at the cutting edge of using new technologies to reduce emissions on production. I worked with Rupert on The Young Offender some years ago, and I was very pleased with how many days the generator stayed at the production office in the car park, because Rupert was able to find ways to make it work without the generator. Paul Cullen is one of the most senior transport captains in Ireland. He's worked in Ireland and abroad in that role. I've worked with Paul on the rhythm section, which was one of the biggest productions to come into the country with Eon Productions. Again, Paul is working on all the top end productions that come into the country, and has recently done some groundbreaking work in relation to emissions reduction on Bodkin and on Irish Wish. Maria Hingerty is a long-standing champion of sustainability on film productions. Maria was the first sustainability coordinator in the country all of 8 years ago. She was sustainability coordinator on Vikings, and worked out of the locations department. So Maria also works as a locations coordinator, and she worked on productions like The Last Jewel and also recently on Irish Wish with Paul. So those are the three areas we're going to look at: lighting, transport, and filming on location. And so first of all, I'm going to go over to Rupert. And so Rupert, I'm going to throw two broad questions at you. And then I'll let you answer them as you see fit. I know you have a presentation for us on this. So can you tell us about efficient lighting? Where have we come from? Where are we now? And to give us an insight into how much more efficient modern lighting systems are compared to legacy systems. And particularly with a focus on powering the lights, you know, things like right sizing generators, the feasibility of using mains power, the pros and cons of battery systems, and what other options are out there. So Rupert, I'll hand over to you.
Hello. Hello. Okay. Yeah. So just as Stan said, primarily I'm looking at this from a DP and a gaffer point of view, but I'm going to try and keep this as non-technical as I possibly can, and just give people in production and the other departments enough of an overview that you can talk to your gaffers and you can talk to your DP and go, right, lads, can we do this? And why we should be doing this. And what I'm going to do is, first of all, I'm going to give a very brief overview of the amount of power we're using and some of the terminology that we use in the lighting department, just so you can discuss with others on your productions. So let me just open up this 1 second there now. Okay. So here. So who is this? Who are we aiming at? Now, lighting and power. Everybody thinks about power when you think of a film set. You think of big giant lights and all that, but you know, how do we actually use power? Where does it come from and how much are we using? So I'm going to start with this little guy here. So that is a 1K Ari Fresnel. Kind of everybody, you've seen one of those. How much power is it using? That thing there uses 1,000 watts or 1 kilowatt. Now, how much is a kilowatt? A kilowatt is enough power to run one of those. It'll run your microwave. It's a little bit more than 1 horsepower, and it is literally a measurement of how much work we are doing. If you were Usain Bolt and you were running very, very fast, you would be using about a kilowatt for a very, very short amount of time before you'd, if you were me, you'd be on the ground having a coronary. We think of a kilowatt in terms of lighting as not a very large amount of power. It is a large amount of power. If you actually, as Stan was saying earlier, that 1 litre of diesel is about 10 hours of work. Imagine that you're using that amount of power every second. The kilowatt is a measurement of 1,000 watts in a second. And I said, it's a lot of power. It's about the amount of power that a human being can put out for a very, very short amount of time. If we have a look at this, what really counts though is not the kilowatt, but the kilowatt hour. Let me very quickly talk about a kilowatt hour. A kilowatt hour is exactly what it says in the tin. It's 1,000 watts being used for 1 hour. Now, why is that important? It's important because, first of all, when you get your ESB bill, that's what you're being charged. It's a 1 billable unit. So when you hear about a unit in your ESB bill, it's using 1,000 watts for 1 full hour. So if you had one of those lights on for 1 hour, it's going to use 1 kilowatt. That's about 45 cents on an ESB bill. A standard Irish house, has about 14 kilowatts available. So you could plug in 14 of those lights in an Irish house. That would be it. Now that's, that's a lot of power, and, we should be able to run on an Irish house. You could do your average Irish small feature if you were very clever on that, unless you wanted to plug in a big light. Now, I'm sure you guys can see there, that guy there, that's an Arri Max. That's one of the, if you're a gaffer now, that's proper lighting porn there. That guy there uses 18 kilowatts. Now, we literally can't plug that into an Irish house. It's too much power, that one single light. Just in terms of scale, I've included it. There's a kitten in the shot. If you look there, you can see how big the light is. That guy, 18 kilowatts. So we're not going to be using that if we can possibly help it. If we do need it, we're going to need a generator. Now, let's go and have a quick look at generators. How much power do we use or can we use on a set? If you go into one of the stages in the older studio, shall we say, in Bray, there is a little bit more than 170 kilowatts available. Now, that is enough, funny enough, to run 170 of those lights, or 170 microwaves if you felt so inclined. That's enough to run 11 houses easily. So a small housing estate. So just one stage in Bray is enough to run, a small housing estate. Going into, if you were to take all of the studios in Ireland and add them all up, I worked out last night, it was about enough power to run Cove or Mallow, all the houses. Now, not the businesses, but, that's a lot. That's a small power station, lads. So when we talk about using power in our industry, that's a lot of power. Why so much power? Because we use it. There's a certain chicken and eggness about this. In the industry, using traditional technology, we've needed a lot of power, so we have a lot of power. And it's easy to fall into the trap that, well, sure, we need the power, so we get the power. So just be aware of that. You also there are brownie points if you can recognize anybody in the photos. I recognized 2 people yesterday on those ones. Now, what do we need to do? Well, we need to use less power. Straightforward enough. And the obvious answer is to go LED. Why do we go LED? Because LEDs are between 2 to 5 times more efficient than conventional old school tungsten lighting. Now, what does that mean by they're more efficient? It means that we actually use less electricity for the same amount of light. What comes out the front, same amount of electricity, same amount of light comes out, less electricity goes in. The really important thing about this, though, is you're going to need buy-in from your DP and your gaffer, but that's, as it says there, that's absolutely vital. Very quick example, an Arri Sky panel, which I'm sure you guys have all seen, it's the blue one on top, is more than 5 times as efficient as the older mole underneath it there. So it takes 400 watts, so a little bit less than 1 kilowatt. That mole there takes over nearly exactly 2 kilowatts to run. So, you basically need a big Jenny to run a bunch of those. You could probably run, comfortably 20 sky panels off your average house without worrying about it. So, without even using a Jenny at all. Now, I'm going to be very quick here about LEDs. You're going to get pushback, and I've got it myself as a gaffer. Obviously, as a DP, I haven't, because I get to decide what the hell I feel like using, but as a gaffer, I have. And let's be aware of them. LEDs are not magic bullets. They're more expensive. There's a limit to how big you can make them, unlike HMIs that we had earlier. Some DPs prefer the look of tungsten. It actually has its own look, and you need to be aware of that. They're not as quick to service on if they do break down, and they can be expensive to repair. So that's important. But taking all that into account, they're still the way of the future, and they use a hell of a lot less power. Now, from the other side of it, in terms of the actual where the electricity comes from on set, preferably not from generators. I am on a one-man crusade to get rid of as much generations as possible on my sets. Why? because they're smelly, they make loads of noise, and they tend to break down. So we'll leave our Jenny alone for a second. Personally, what are we doing? We are doing two things in our crews here in Cork. One, we're using a lot of what are called portable battery generators. Now, they're not actually generators, they're batteries. We have to get the electricity into them from which we do basically with these guys. We charge them overnight at night rate electricity, which is much cheaper. And then we deploy them during the day. We're looking to buy our fourth one of these in the next couple of weeks. What are the advantages? First of all, they're silent. And they have no fumes. We can literally bring these inside. Like, we were doing a job there recently in Photo House, which is, don't touch anything, don't put anything on the ground. No, you can't touch it, can't hang anything. We were able to put these right in the middle of a grade 1 listed Georgian building and have the power there. They're particularly green if you charge them from renewables. Now, what's not great about them? They're not instantly rechargeable. You can't just chuck a load of diesel or petrol into them and have them going again. They have to be charged. They're more expensive than a Jenny, and you're not going to run a really big light fixture. But if you're doing smaller sets, or even if the Jenny is only running the big lights and everything else is running off these, straight away we have a saving. Next thing is very high capacity VLOX. These are essentially camera batteries. Because LEDs use a hell of a lot of power, we can actually run them with batteries on the actual lights themselves. Now, we've been running battery lights for donkey's years, but with these, we can run them for hours on normal big camera batteries. A lot of the same advantages of the battery generator. But the great thing about these is they're incredibly portable, which means you can turn around really, really quickly. Now, I've never met a producer or an AD who doesn't like to hear the words, you can turn around really, really quickly. The main reason you can turn around is you have no cables. You literally, the lights have the batteries on them. You pick them up, we move them over there. We turn it around. They're fantastic. Disadvantages, the only real disadvantages that we have for them is that, one, you have to keep damn things on charge, and they're not going to run really big. They're not going to run big fixtures. Anything up to 600 watts, you're fine. But remember, 600 watts in an LED is equivalent to easily 2.5 to 3,000 watts tungsten. So, that's a lot. It's a fair lump. The big thing for us going forward is basically rolling out, I'm just going to back one, more of these. These for us have been an absolute goldmine, especially if we charge them at night rate electricity. The other thing we discovered recently is you can actually recharge them in car rechargers, which is brilliant. They recharge in about 20 minutes on a car charger. So if you're in a location that is near, say, a Lidl, as we were recently, you can charge a whole bunch of these at lunch, in an hour at lunch. So that's what we're doing. Okay, I'll put you back there to Stan.
Thanks, Rupert. It's great to get an understanding of the technical. My background is in locations, so we're regularly trying to figure out about generators and batteries and how to power things, and particularly with the sustainability mindset on it. So it's great to get an insight into the background to it and the different technologies. Just in terms of using generators and right sizing generators, how should a producer or a PM look at it in terms of getting the right generator to use on a production? Where is the calculation done, or is it the DOP and the gaffer who do it? And what scope is there for using batteries to cover peak loads rather than overspecking a generator and having a big generator running when there's a small load?
There's a great thing that I'm always reminded of. When you see a generator start up and a hell of a lot of black smoke comes out of it, any diesel mechanic will tell you that's probably because the Jenny has been running for ages with no load on it. So we have a 60 kilowatt Jenny, for instance, running at locations, and someone's using it to boil a kettle. So the generator has never actually worked hard enough, and it's building up soot in the cylinders. How can we use less jennies? Again, I'm going to talk about this simply from the lighting department. One very simple way is only using the generators to run the big lights when the big lights are on. Running the smaller stuff from the batteries. Now, of course, it's very important that if we are using batteries, that we charge them from reasonably clean electricity. There's no point in getting, a 300 kilowatt Jenny from Cine and then using that to charge a bunch of batteries. That makes no sense. The batteries have to be recharged from renewables. There are definitely going to be times when you're still going to need the Jenny truck. If you're doing, if you want to light a castle and you want to put up a row of 18Ks, that's not going to happen on conventional batteries, not in the short term anyway. But if we are only using that Jenny truck to run those lights when those lights are on, and the rest of the time when we're doing a bunch of close-ups of hand props, why are we running a 300 kilowatt generator? That to me is the real essence of it. We're using the Jenny when we need to use the Jenny, not because, oh, the Jenny's there, we'll just have the Jenny on.
So the options are there, then it's really just a matter of developing the focus on sustainability, on emissions reduction when you're planning the shoot, which presumably would have some cost implications if you're going to have a big generator and a small generator. Yeah,
I mean, to me, the big one is that if you actually think that a kilowatt of power is 45 cents roughly if you buy it from the ESB, you can double that or triple that if it's coming out of a big Jenny on set. By the time you rent the big Jenny, you drive it down, you have a Jenny up and a driver, and you're filling it with diesel. If you actually sat down and worked out per unit how much you are paying every time that Jenny is just sitting there turned on, any UPM or producer is going to go, Jesus, how the hell can anyone who's ever looked at even a breakdown is going to go that's a hell of a lot of money. And even if you leave out the green agenda, we can save money doing this. And I think that's an easy sell.
That's what we want to hear.
Yeah.
So Maria, you're on the other side of the equation with the locations department. The locations department is responsible for providing services to cast crew and extras when we're out filming on location. So you've been involved in very big productions with hundreds of crew and extras like Vikings and The Last Duel. And as I said, on Vikings, you were the sustainability coordinator. Can you tell us about energy use on location and what you've seen over the years in terms of burning diesel on the different equipment that's used in locations? And you're on mute. Sorry, Maria. It can be very hard to get that off mute sometimes.
You have me.
Excellent.
Hi, everybody. So obviously on location, we are the ones who would book in a lot of the plant. So that would involve that would be things like the tower lights, the generators, the heaters for the marquees, the ATVs, the buggies and trailers, tractors, all of those things, and all of them using large quantities of diesel. And so this year, for example, when I went into Irish Wish, I decided to look into the hydrogenated vegetable oil, which we call HVO. And the price difference was something that we were going to be concerned about. It's about a third more expensive. But having done a bit of research, we also realized that you use a lot less of it than you use of diesel. And of course, the most fantastic thing about it is that it has almost no emissions at all when it's being used. So a couple of our hires, for example, welfare units and also solar powered toilets, were coming in, and where they were using their fuel capacity, they were working on HVO anyway. And then we were also getting tower lights from an international supplier, shall we say, who were also supplying the HVO with the units. But we had a lot of vendors who were not used to using the HVO and were still putting diesel into, for example, ATVs and the small generators that would come with the heaters for the marquees, for example. So I went back to them all and I said, could you try out the HVO in your units to see, because they were very reluctant at the beginning. They said, no, we don't use that. We don't know if it'll work. We don't know if it'll clog up our machines. But anyway, so when I said, well, look, there are providers out there now who are going to be stealing the business from you if you don't check it out. They went back and they got their engineers to try out the HVO and came back to me and said, actually, we're really pleased with it. It works fine. You might just need to change your filters a bit more often. So that meant that on Irish Wish, for example, we powered generators, tower lights, heaters, all the ATVs, some tractors. We could have potentially done things like genie lifts, and but that wasn't in my realm, so I wasn't party to it. And so that worked really well from the perspective of us lowering our emissions across the board. And if anybody wants at any point to contact me to find out who those particular providers are, then I'm very happy to give that information. And as Rupert was saying, then we also made sure that nobody was using tungsten bulbs in the tower lights, because obviously they chew up the fuel. And whilst we did have some, as I was saying, we did have some hybrid tower lights, we discovered that actually the hybrid tower lights, as opposed to the solar powered tower lights, were more efficient energy-wise. So we now have a couple of vendors Irish vendors, who've served us very well over the years, who are now investing in bringing in their own tower lights, so we don't have to use multinationals. And we are also seeing Irish vendors bringing in the hybrid generators. So just to explain the hybrid generators, whilst they're still using fuel, they're using HVO. And so the HVO part of the powered generator fires up the battery. And so it, for example, in a unit-based scenario, during the day, there's going to be a lot of draw on the generator. So it is using the fuel. But then at the same time as it's giving us the power, it's powering up the battery. And then at night, when we don't need very much power, we're using the battery power. So, I mean, it's been quite a puzzle trying to figure out exactly the best use of those hybrid generators. And I think that for the most part, they're expensive to hire in, but the ones that are coming from the multinational companies are also very over spec. So they're 100 kVA generators or 60 kVA generators, when in fact we most likely don't need that size. So now we've got Irish vendors who are coming on board with their own hybrid generators, and they're doing them at 40 kilowatts and 60. 60. So yeah, so like I have a much broader expectation of where we can save on fuel as well as the plant and the hires that we need to facilitate the locations. So just to give you an example of an effort that we made on the last dual, we had a unit base that served as a sort of, it was like a small town actually. It was during COVID time, so we had loads of marquees and loads of easy ups, and it all seemed completely impossible to try and keep up with the demand for fuel and water in those scenarios. So having a look at it, we realized that the amount of fuel trucks that were coming in and delivering to generators individually over a week, for example, there might be 10 trips coming into that unit base to fill up maybe 500 or 600 litres at a time. So I went to production and I said, can we please buy a 9,500 litre tank? We'd have one big tank on this unit base that we're going to use for 4 weeks, and we'll be able to pump directly or into mobile bowsers, and we save a third off the price because it's so much cheaper to buy it in bulk. But importantly, we save all the toing and froing of large oil tankers coming in and out of sight from Dublin down to Wicklow. And then similarly, we had a situation with water where we had 40 stables, we had 40 horses, and they all drink 80 litres of water a day. So that's not to mention the loos and catering and everything else. And so to avoid all the transportation that all that water was requiring in small quantities, we drilled a well on the site, and we were able to pump water from that. So the reason why I'm mentioning all these things is because we really need to be thinking outside of the box. So every single thing that we do is using some kind of energy, and that energy is still, even though we try our very best on locations to minimize the carbon output, we're still going to be using energy even from something as simple as driving to the job. So then what are the things we did on Irish Wish? We had a scenario where we were taking over a location, and so again, in order to reduce the amount of impact we were creating, instead of the previous production taking out some of the facilities that it had in place for its own production, we rang them and said, could you leave that there, and we will take over the hire. We rang the vendor, so say for example track matting, so we rang the track matting company and we said, can you do us a deal whereby you don't collect that track matting and you leave it there for us? And so it saved the pickup of all those track mats and the collection of them by the first company. It saved us having to put them in for the installation. And then, as it happened, at the end of that production, at the end of our production, we were able to pass it on to another production. So we had saved several heavy duty freight journeys and lots of man hours and labour to put all the track mats in and out 3 times. We just did it once, that between 3 productions. And we also passed on hires of tower lights and the welfare units. The welfare units are from Rego Hire, and they've turned out to be absolutely fantastic. Solar powered units, barely use any fuel at all, and everybody was delighted with them. So they also got passed on. Yeah, so I suppose the reason why I have come kind of sideways at this job, I come from a theatre background where we never had any money for spare things, and I love that in the locations department we are like puzzle solvers, and so thinking outside the box of how to reduce unnecessary journeys and unnecessary purchases. You know, I love all that puzzle to be figured out. And you know, back in the day when I started in Vikings, we you know, we were really about waste management. So that was my role, was to work out how to reduce the amount of waste. But I very quickly realized then it wasn't just about informing people and waste separation and everything. Again, on a broader spectrum, if we weren't creating loads of general waste, we weren't creating loads of bin lifts, because the general waste was minimalized, and the weight, it also saved money for the production because the weights were minimalized, and all the other waste products, you know, packed down and take a while for the bins to fill. So, you know, all of those journeys, all of those, it all amounts up to saving fuel and reducing emissions. So,
Super. Thank you very much for that insight, Maria. I worked on the last duel with you, as you'll recall, and that job really was an eye-opener. It was the equivalent of 7 large film productions, what we would normally call a large production, and where I would normally have to find accommodation for 5 or 6 standby trucks. On that job, I had 35 standby trucks. We had best part of half an acre of marquee tents. There wasn't a marquee tent available in the country at the time, because we were taking up all the spare capacity, and it was an eye-opener for me. It was really what started me to really put an emphasis on the whole area of sustainability, because it was so big. And going back to Rupert's point earlier on about the generators, I had a generator on my location that was there to power a construction team and offices. But once the construction team were up and running in the morning, all it was doing was powering batteries, and this generator would power a small village. So the construction manager, Nicky Mack, and the props buyer, Marion Picard, were both driving plug-in hybrids. So whenever they came to visit the set, they got brought over to where I had a granny cable. And so, just because I wanted to do something with the power that was being generated that was going to waste. And you know, I think that was the first time that was done on a production power charging electric vehicles. So just on the point you made there about production sharing facilities, I can think of 2 other examples where location managers work together. One was when we were in Ballinrush on the rhythm section. We shared with Vikings and with Into the Badlands, and the 3 location managers worked together to put in infrastructure that we were all able to share. And also this year, you were on Irish Wish, I was on Silver, and we shared facilities in a couple of locations, and equipment in a couple of locations around as well. So it is something that location managers are conscious of, because there are savings there for them on their budgets. But it is great to have that cooperation going on between productions. We've just had word in from Paul that he's got caught up in an emergency and he won't be able to join us. So we're hoping to do another session with Paul later on, where we can talk about transport in detail, but I'll just give a quick overview of where we've gotten to in our conversations leading up to this webinar today. So basically, moving people and equipment is the biggest source of emissions on a film production. And we're trying to find the opportunities to change how we do things, change the equipment we use, and find ways to reduce the emissions from cars, vans, and trucks on film productions. So Paul was the transport captain on Bodkin and on Irish Wish, and both of those productions used HVO. So HVO is a drop-in replacement for diesel oil. You can put it straight into an engine without modifying the engine. So I spoke earlier on about vegetable oil. If you put this into an engine, it'll gum up the filter. So you either modify the engine or you modify the fuel. So HVO is in Ireland, it's produced at Whitegate Oil Refinery. So all the commercial kitchens and restaurants around the country have their waste oil collected. It's legal, it's mandatory that they have oil collected. They can't put it down the drains. and together with tallow from different meat factories, it gets brought down to Whitegate and it gets converted into HVO. So on Maria's job, Irish Wish, and also on Bodkin, and we also did it on Silver as well, is we ran our generators on HVO, and I think we've proven between the 3 productions that HVO is viable. So now I understand that Sharon Cronin and Sasha Dillon, on their current production, they're using HVO to power the generators and to power the trucks. So we look forward to hearing how they get on that production with it. The other thing that Maria and Paul tried, and Darragone was the sustainability officer on Bodkin, or is, and they did a trial of the hybrid generators, which Maria has spoken about, where instead of the generator, a big generator running all day, a big generator that's specified for the heavy load. So if you can imagine all the hair dryers going in the morning on a big extras day, the generator has to be capable of dealing with that. But when everybody goes to set, the generator is now too powerful for what the load that's needed. And so what Dara tried on Bodkin, and Maria and Sam did it as a second trial on Irish Wish, was to put in a big battery system. And basically the unit base was being powered from the battery, and behind the battery was a generator. So when all the hair dryers came on in the morning, the generator would kick in as well, and it would provide additional power to the battery, and it would charge the battery. And then when everybody went to set, and it was just lights in the production truck, in the AD truck, and various work that's going on around the unit base, the generator would cut out and it would run on battery power all day. So I'm still haven't seen the final results from those 2 productions, but the initial results and what we would have expected based on trials in the UK is the reduction in emissions was about 50% by using that. The flip side of it is you have the cost of the battery, which is quite expensive, and the battery that was used for those trials is over 4 tons in weight. It has to be craned into a location. So there are costs there as well, but we've done the trials, we've proved it in theory, and now we just need to refine it and make it better. The other areas that Paul would have spoken about are cars, so the cast cars and transport and the minibuses. Cast cars, there is a move to hybrid because there are range issues with using batteries. As Rupert said earlier on, you can't just top up a battery quickly, it does take time. So if you have a cast car that has to do a run, an unexpected run, if everything was planned, you could work out your charging times. But because so much of what we do is reactive, something gets changed, a scene gets brought forward, a cast car has to run and collect an actor who wasn't scheduled to come in or wasn't to come in that early. And as I know of an example of one production in Northern Ireland where they used fully electric cast cars, they were doing runs that hadn't been planned for, and one of the cast cars ran out of power and they had to send a tow truck to bring it back to base late at night with some A-list cast on board. So it was a problem. So currently we're using all diesel taxis and minibuses. We're moving to hybrids. There have been a few hybrids used on productions. There's one transport manager in Ireland, I believe, has just invested in a fully electric limousine. Be interesting to see how that works. But hybrid is really where we need to go as an industry. We need to be moving to a situation where we're looking for hybrids that when we don't use a hybrid, it's by default. It's because of extraneous circumstances that we try and make the default to use hybrid. For trucks and vans, there aren't really hybrid options yet, but there are 1 or 2. I think Volkswagen have one coming. Mercedes, I think, have one coming. Mercedes, Ford, and Volkswagen all have fully electric options for vans, but they're not really suitable for the type of work we do on film. So those are the big ones on transport. And of course, the trucks as well. we spoke to a company last year about converting one of our trucks from diesel to battery power, and the cost to do it was €60,000. So that's not cost effective at the moment. There are other options we could look at of maybe making the trucks hybrid, but there is a capital cost there that are the companies that hire the trucks into the film industry will need to see a path for a return, to make a return on it if they're to invest in this new equipment. But as I said, the cars are the easy one, especially for hybrid, and the vans will be next, but the options for hybrid at the moment are quite small. So I hope we've given people a good overview there of how we use diesel in the film industry, how we power the various aspects of our work, and where the options are to reduce emissions. So if anybody has any questions that they'd like to throw out to us, I'll hand back to Anthony, and he can run the Q&A session.
Hi everyone, listen, thank you so much for that really in-depth conversation on an area of sustainability that I don't think we really had across many of the webinars and discussions we've had the last couple of years in this area in the industry. I think it's really clear the amount of in-depth work that you've all done already. And I suppose one of the questions that comes to mind for me is how's the best way to get this information out to wider productions, to smaller scale productions? How do we spread the message of the work that's being done? What's the best way, do you think?
I think it's from my perspective, it's to broaden how we do the Albert process, the carbon calculator process. Now I know the next webinar will be about that whole area, and how, you know, I suppose the same things, where we've come from, where we are, and where we're going with it. But I would say, without wanting to preempt it, to answer your question, is that that's where we broaden it out, that we can put the options on the table, and have the conversation. So my experience and the experience of some of the other sustainability practitioners, and I know Maria as well, is when we talk to HODs about the stuff that we've seen on other productions, or we've seen in other countries, we're getting a very good hearing, and that's really how it will be done. And so on silver, the decision came from the foreign funder that they wanted sustainability done to a very high standard. So we were the first production in Ireland to have a full sustainability department focused on it. And that meant that there was someone there from Prop -10 to talk to HODs as they came on board and tell them about the options that are there and where the opportunities are, and refer them to other HODs who may have used technologies in the past. And as I said, we got a great hearing on that. Yeah. And so that's really where it is. I think it's part of the Albert process, the carbon calculator process, that we, instead of just doing the calculation, that we're also looking at how can we reduce emissions.
Rupert or Maria, want to come in on that?
Yeah, I think it's actually easier for smaller productions. And I think of the shows I'm on at the moment, they're both doc series, one for TG Gaffer and one for TG Gaffer RTE. And because they're smaller shows, we tend to use smaller stuff. And when I say smaller stuff, I'm talking about smaller vehicles, smaller lights, smaller locations. And so straight away the need for large gensets just isn't there. Now there is a need for generators, but we don't need big generators. And if there is not a need for big generators and we can use small stuff, well then we can use some of the battery powered stuff, or we can use small Jennies running on HVO. So it's actually, I can absolutely, if I wear my poacher gamekeeper hat, I can definitely turn around and say, look, I need to run, as I said, 6 18Ks outside Caircastle. I'm not going to do that in a battery. If you're running a bunch of Aperture 1200s and you're running them off a 60 kVA Jenny, then you're just taking the mick. I'm being very polite there. That all of that can be done extremely greatly. And going back to what Stan was saying about Albert, I think as Albert is becoming mandated as part of the BAI, etc., there needs to be I might get shot now for saying this. There needs to be maybe a little bit more stick and maybe a little less carrot going, or maybe more carrot and stick going. Lads, if you're doing this, it's great. And like as Stan was saying about one of the the big productions coming in, mandating this. There needs to, I have no idea how this could be done, because luckily I'm not in production, because everything would go bankrupt spent on fancy lights if I was. There needs to be more, perhaps, carrot going, lads, if you do this, it's going to be great for you because X. And if you don't do this, it's going to be bad for you because of Y, It's a little bit too easy at the moment. Like, you just do it and you say, oh yeah, we did it. It's great. But there maybe needs to be a bit more follow-up to say, did you though?
Yeah, I hear you. I understand. Maria, do you want to come in on that?
I suppose from the perspective of having a mandate, I think I have always felt like the government should be paying for, well, via Screen Ireland or whoever, should be paying for the sustainability personnel in the film productions. I think that, or maybe not entirely, but partially, because I think then they would be more embraced by production, as opposed to, oh, there's another expense now we could do without. And I think the argument kind of goes both ways. I think that we can now prove that we can be fiscally astute with energy saving hires, and so I mean, I like the carbon calculator thing is one thing, but practicality is another thing. And I think somebody on the ground full-time, paid properly, would be fantastic for every production that goes out.
Stan, I know you can talk to Screen Ireland and their ambitions for sustainability advisors in productions. And Maria, just the thing that I'd say, you can kind of follow up to what you're saying around the calculator is one piece, practicality is the next piece. I think that's what I'm certainly hearing more and more about, which is why we're even having this discussion now, is because the feedback I get is that everyone